So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Marvel Girls? So let's start the series. For every being that was or will ever exist, there were a billion deaths in the world. After avoiding one, you discovered another. Naruto was aware of this. His was one of the better ones, all in all. Though it was uncommon for a ninja, particularly a master, to survive into retirement and pass away from old age surrounded by family and friends, he had killed in war, witnessed individuals being executed for the benefit of the town, and even participated in some executions himself. He didn't mind. What followed was less acceptable. It was unexpected, but not unpleasant. For an indefinite period of time since his death, darkness, warmth, and comfort had been the essence of his existence. If it weren't for the pain of 9 demons' absence, he might have surrendered to the tranquility of whatever this was. He had been his constant companion for almost a century, and Naruto had never sensed his absence before, not because of the silence, but rather because of the clear absence of his presence. He had never experienced the sensation of being alone in a body, which was actually the entire essence of who he was. Everything else was right, yet it felt wrong. He had attempted to brush his consciousness against 9 demons' corresponding solidity for some time, but nothing had responded. It was similar to having your seat dragged out from under you when you tried to sit down. However, the ground wasn't even there to grab you. Even though there was no obvious direction in this dark emptiness, it made him lightheaded. Perhaps his soul was experiencing vertigo. All he knew was that he didn't like it. It was uneasy. Only his knowledge of his body could tell him the time in the darkness. He had a body 1 second, and then there was only the sense of comfort and warmth. This moment, he thought, was the becoming. That sounded amazing. In this emptiness, for whatever cool was worth. He became aware of the darkness as time dragged unabatedly forward and discovered, to his astonishment, that it was not infinite. Additionally, the area shrank as his power increased and he was able to exert some degree of control over his motions. He began keeping track of the passing of time by the increasing discomfort of the progressively smaller room. The unease increased steadily until it eventually reached a subdued crescendo. He had been suffocating 1 minute and uncomfortable but happy the next. Whatever the space's previous character had been, it became hostile and appeared to squeeze and contract with far greater intensity than it had before done. Naruto believed it might kill him for a single crazy second that seemed to last forever. How unfortunate. He had already died once, and it appeared that he would pass away again without ever understanding the meaning of life. After that, he left. Before realizing he had been doing anything of the sort, he had been wailing for minutes. He could feel the light on his skin and the air filling his lungs. Before he could completely understand the world around him, he had been cleaned, swaddled, and laid on a soft surface. However, anything would undoubtedly be preferable than the forceful, suffocating constriction that had occurred just moments earlier. It was chilly, the light stinging his eyes even through the eyelids he could not bring himself to open, and the world was suddenly full of space where the darkness had been absent. As time passed, he became conscious of someone pulling him up, placing his mouth against what appeared to be a nipple, and then feeling the milk fill his mouth. He knew how humiliating it was to empty his bladder and move his bowels without any control over either. Without his permission, people came and left, cleaned and fed him, and took him up and placed him down. What else could this be but being a baby? Appeared to be little more than a humiliating exercise. Naruto cursed whatever improbable circumstance had brought him to endure this humiliation with full awareness. Whispering, "There you are," she said. "There's my baby girl." There was a serious problem. These events must have been initiated by a larger power or entity, or a greater being of greater power. Too many things seemed to fit together perfectly, and then, seemingly out of the blue, other things were different. The most important thing was that she was a girl. Why create Naruto's rebirth only to have him take on a feminine form? Additionally, her name was too similar to the original, Naruto, just enough, as if it were intended to be convenient for her. However, that notion was challenged by being born with the opposite gender. She was as blonde as she had been in her former life, and because she was born a mutant, her strength felt uncannily similar to core energy. Although using this power was comparable to using core energy, the applications were noticeably more constrained. Strength, durability, and senses were all passively enhanced, evoking active core energy upgrades. But the only way to externalize the power was to generate and manage electricity. It seems as though the authority was intended to both benefit and constrain her. A sledgehammer to the well-stocked toolset of core energy. She had managed to extract some usefulness from her power via study and practice, but it was far less adaptable than anything Naruto could do. Furthermore, she couldn't rule out the possibility that this existence was just another cycle of reincarnation. A karmic reincarnation with no higher purpose. The resemblances might just be a lucky cosmic shuffle. Since everything was possible, it was easy to assume that in an infinite world, coincidences were more than likely to happen. In fact, Naruto believed that logic required that coincidences happen, and that blind probability could explain all of the apparent resemblances to her former life. However, this line of thought was forced upon her like a wrench in the gears of some enormous machine by the fact that she had kept her memories. As Naruto understood it, the samsara had no beginning. However, her recollections of her former existence unmistakably signaled the start of a cycle that had neither beginning nor end. She made an effort to ignore the persistent voice that said that all of the writings on the samsara were merely male conjecture. No matter how strongly they claimed to, men were unable to understand the intricate and minute workings of the universe. She eventually brushed this line of thinking aside as useless navel-gazing that only confused her because it was giving her a headache. As she saw it, there wasn't much else to do. She was only able to surmise as to why. Therefore, Naruto pondered, flipped it around in her mind, applied fresh theories to the issue as they came to her, and concentrated on leading her second life. She spent time developing her abilities and transforming her body into the weapon it had been in a past life. She also spent time getting to know her new parents and this new world. She may have justified it as acclimating to a new environment because she was a shinobi. A shinobi had an obligation to be ready for everything. Information collecting was also necessary for preparedness. But more simply, she wanted to know about them. It had been okay that Naruto had never met his parents in person. However, Naruto wanted to know her parents, who were still living. She was curious about the world that had given birth to them. Her father was a blonde Icelander, while her mother was Japanese. She attributed her perfect comprehension of her parents' speech to the language being exactly the same as the one she knew in her former world. However, as she grew older and engaged with individuals from different cultures and backgrounds in both school and the media, she realized that there were a ludicrous number of languages in the world, and she was able to understand them all. She had been given the ability to understand every human tongue without any study or effort. Nothing could support the idea that this life had been planned if that hadn't been done on purpose for her convenience. However, Naruto had always been a very fortunate gambler. Her mother, Aiko Sato, was a composer. She was petite, delicate, and clad in irezumi from neck to ankle, which stood out against her warm blouses and light-colored cardigans. With the exception of the rare times she was required at a performance or recording studio, she worked primarily from home. She was a woman of concentrated focus when working, yet she was also kind and sensitive. It seemed like Naruto's eyes, with their black sclera and red iridides, were all she had inherited. She was tall and her mother was short. She was athletic and covered in the results of years of daily training, whereas her mother was soft and did not enjoy strenuous exercise. Her mother was a culinary magician, and Naruto did a good job of handling instant ramen. They even have different powers. She mostly inherited her father's traits. Thor Gurkerson resembled the legendary deity he was named after. Her father dwarfed even Naruto, who was 185 centimeters tall, by a head. He wore his beard in a braid, his hair long, and he was muscular. Despite his striking resemblance to the Viking warrior from whom he may have come, he was kind and had a simple life, keeping a few sheep and calves. It must have been a mutant skill combined with his strength that she had inherited from him, the natural capacity to grasp all languages. The notion had never been refuted by him. His raw strength was greater than Naruto's, but there were no obvious symptoms of mutation. She had no trouble lifting a medium automobile, but she had saw him effortlessly move a trailer truck to impress kids. There was always music and affection in their home, a red house on an Icelandic grassland that gave way to a rocky coastline in the south and to wooded hills and striking mountains in the north. It was the perfect family life she had always imagined as a little child growing up in Hyde Ninja Village. She was still very much in love with Naruto's wife, kids, and house, but things had changed. To have a joyful childhood. In her former existence, she could never have imagined having two devoted parents and living a picture-perfect life on a picturesque farm. Being a woman and not being Naruto didn't bother her. She wanted to spend as much time as possible enjoying this life, regardless of the ramifications or outcomes. The only thing she longed for was that she didn't miss Nine Demon as much. The gap his presence had created had never felt right. It felt wrong now, just as it had in the womb. No matter how much she missed him, Nine Demon had most likely found bliss, whether he had returned to his form or gone to some afterlife. She was embarrassed to acknowledge that she missed him more than she did Himawari, Boruto, or Hinata. She missed Hyde Ninja Village more than she missed her children, whom she had lavished with love. She was now living out the childhood of Naruto's dreams, which was incorrect because Nine Demon was no longer with her, and she had not experienced life without his unwavering presence for the whole 150 years that Naruto had lived. And it was this inaccuracy that let her concentrate on her purpose, which, even in the absence of any intelligence on the goal, could only be a mission. For a mutant, her existence was particularly fortunate. Iceland was a very free and progressive nation. They did not share the prejudice that the majority of the rest of the world had against mutants. She had rights, although many mutants had united under Magneto's violent brotherhood of mutants due to the absence of them. Every time she took her mother to a performance, or drove her father's truck to the market, she didn't fear unexpected attacks in a crowd. She didn't have to conceal her identity out of concern that society would decide to take her life at some point, though they would have a very difficult battle if that were to happen. Instead, whenever her family was in the closest town, kids pleaded for her to show off her abilities. When she drew lightning from the sky into her eager palms, they yelled with joy. When her mother breathed circles of flame into the air, even forming the flame into dancing humanoid figures, and her father raised a car over his head one-handed, they let out oohs and ahs. In America, a mutant might have been killed for a similar performance. No, things were considerably worse for other mutants. Whatever her purpose was, Thor's daughter couldn't help but believe it lay outside the borders of near-utopic Iceland. But for the moment, she didn't want to go. She had a happy life, practicing out of habit, and relishing the good fortune bestowed upon her by whatever had created this new existence. That was the way life was until her father vanished. On the eve of her 15th birthday, one rainy morning, he had disappeared into the forest. She recalled what he had said to her last. "I have to go settle some business. I may be gone a long while, but not even Ragnarok will keep me from you and your mother." 2 years had passed, and she had not seen him since. As was her custom on most days, Naruto woke up early on the morning of her 17th birthday. Even though her room was dark, she could see clearly in every area. A stack of boxes she hadn't yet unpacked, bare walls, 2 windows with the curtains pulled, and a minimalist dresser drawer with a mirror against the wall. She looked in the mirror at herself. She had the same appearance as the previous day. The same large lips, exquisite features, wavy blonde hair, and bright red eyes. That wrongness persisted even though she was a typical adolescent mutant ninja girl. The gaping hole left by Nine Demon's departure. She was in business. She changed out of the covers and put on an orange sweater, a sports bra, and athletic leggings. She was out the door in a matter of minutes after her fingers skillfully and swiftly gathered her long hair into a loose plait. She fled through the Queen's neighborhood of Forest Hills. No matter what city they lived in, it had become a ritual. Before the sun rose, she was in charge of the city. She ran west today, away from the nearest thing to a New York City suburb and toward Manhattan, though the direction didn't matter. When the houses and trees gave way to multi-story buildings and gloomy streets lit by the sickly orange of street lamps, she ran across rooftops, through yards, over fences, and even through entire houses when needed. She utilized this time as a kind of meditation, accompanied only by her own footsteps and the sounds of a city that never sleeps. There was no need to speculate or ponder the significance or ramifications of the occurrences in her life. The sole objective was the next stride. The only thing was the actual running. She was on top of a 5-story building when she heard someone scream. A scream, high and feminine, was suddenly interrupted by scuffle noises and profanity. She heard threats as she trained her ears. "Shut the fuck up, bitch." She was exactly above an alley formed by the gap between two buildings after taking a few steps and a leap that cleared the street below to the building directly opposite the last. She let out a sigh. It was a typical picture. Minor criminals were produced in large cities. A woman was mugged in the early hours of the morning by 2 males, one with a knife and the other a pistol. The woman was cowering against the wall, and the shooter kept his weapon trained on her. The other, still holding his knife, attempted to rummage through her pocketbook. If it weren't for his partner's mounting annoyance, Naruto might have smiled at his clumsy job. "Hurry up, man," the shooter said. Nerves already running high, his companion bungled the handbag, spilling its contents upon the concrete. This prompted her to curse once more, and she laughed before stifling it and stepping off the building's edge. After landing in a crouch, she secretly chastised herself for the thud since, despite her athletic build, she weighed about 205 kilograms, which was significantly more than the average human. The sound alerted the gunman, but before he could blink, she grabbed the handgun from his grasp. She tossed it farther down the alley, over her shoulder. Somewhere in the dark it clattered to the ground. "Who the—" With a sneer she doubted they could see outside of the street lamps, she interrupted him, saying, "You should just go, boys. I really don't want to have to hit you." The disarmed man turned to his buddy with an expression of disbelief. He retreated behind his companion and glanced up and down at her, saying, "These wannabe heroes are crawling out of the woodwork." He pushed his partner's shoulder a little and said, "Pretty one, too. Won't be for long. Will you cut this bitch already?" He moved cautiously forward, knife in front. She assessed him. He had light skin, mousy brown hair, a stubbled jaw, and a tall, weedy build. He gripped the knife tightly, yet it shook. A frustrated moan escaped her mouth. Naruto pointed to the woman, who was following the action with rapt attention despite her terror, and squeaked when the attention was returned to her. "Come on, man, are you serious with this? You're shaking more than her." His dark eyes were wide and dilated, and a heady mix of adrenaline and panic gripped the man's mind as he turned to face the woman. Naruto made 2 finger snaps. His focus returned to her, as she signaled to herself. "No, no. Keep your eyes over here." There was a minor decrease in the knife's shaking. Naruto gave him one final chance, but she could tell by the way his jaw was set that he was set. "You've got a choice here. Drop the knife, go home." "Cut her!" the unarmed shooter yelled. It was that or electrocution. "Or you can take that asshole's advice and I'll have to hit you." The gunman sounded off again, and his partner's back appeared to straighten a little. His shoulders were set, the knife stopped shaking, and he took a step forward. "It's just some chick, you got like 50 pounds on her. Just do it and let's go," he said. A slap would do, she decided. When you threw lightning at someone, you never knew who you may kill. She pointed to the middle of her ample bust and said, "Okay. But a piece of advice, come at me right here." She smiled at him and said, "Once you're committed, well, you might as well go for broke, right?" The man took 4 long steps toward her, knife leading, and aimed for her heart. Before he realized it, it was over. He was hit across the face by Nerda's open palm as he stepped to the right. The knife clattered away, joining the gun in the darkness as the man fell to the ground. The man collapsed to the ground boneless, and there was silence for a time. The gunman appeared to understand that his companion was already unconscious for a second time. The shooter then sprang into action, stumbling over his own feet in his rush to turn around and thrash his way out of this predicament. With his friend long forgotten, the shooter ran out into the night, saying, "Shit! Fuck! I'm sorry! Oh God! A fucking super, just my luck." Nerda looked to the woman, who was staring in shock at the knife wielder's lifeless body. "You okay?" she asked, scanning the woman from head to toe for any injuries. Not even a tear in her blue scrubs indicated that she was in great health. She would be considered middle-aged by Nerdu. Her brown hair has a hint of gray, and there are crow's feet at the corners of her eyes. She was attractive, and there were laugh lines around her mouth. Before getting waylaid, a nurse might have been traveling to or from work. A smile spread across the woman's face as she said, "I told them I didn't want to hit them." Before rushing to embrace her, Nerda raced over. She said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," as if it were a mantra. Nerda simply gave her a comforting slap on the back. The woman released her grip after a minute and, as if in a fit of rage, kicked the unconscious man in the ribs. Nerda put a hand on her shoulder and yanked her back, saying, "Whoa! Hey, stop!" She was laughing when she said, "I'm pretty sure I did enough damage for both of us." But it was also accurate. Nerdu got a glimpse of the would-be robber's face by flipping him over. He had been lying on it, and it was covered in blood and saliva. Upon closer examination, it showed a laceration above his cheekbone and along his orbital socket, as well as the start of a horrible bruise from where she had smacked him. The pool of blood and saliva on the floor contained 3 teeth. She could easily claim credit for the teeth, but she was unsure whether the laceration was caused by her hand or the floor when he fell. Air was sucked between Nerda's teeth. She had taken care to avoid punching him, but even a simple slap would have been too much for a typical human, so she said, "Jesus! Like tissue paper, this guy." The victim's phone's flashlight blinked on over her shoulder, and the woman let out a cry that was halfway between shock and pity. Nerda got up and attempted to guide the woman out. "It's best if we just call him an ambulance." The woman's second gasp interrupted her. She had gotten a good look at Nerda's eyes, which were bare since she had been dashing across roofs in the dark and didn't think she would need them, but which she typically kept hidden behind sunglasses since they had moved out of Iceland. She questioned, "Are you a mutant?" When it came to the topic of mutants in America, Nerdu didn't notice any of the usual terror in her eyes. The public was still unpredictable despite the fact that Charles Xavier and his X-Men had significantly improved the public's perception of mutants and, after rescuing a powerful individual or people, had even succeeded in passing legislation making it illegal for the government to discriminate against them. Magneto's terrorist group made it simple for the general public to identify mutants as other, to be feared, regardless of how hard Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, Captain America, and innumerable others tried to humanize superpowered individuals. Nerda responded, "Yeah, that I am," with a sigh of worldly fatigue. Before the woman's touch on her wrist stopped her, she was about to fish her shades out of her hoodie pocket. She gave her a kind smile and said, "Oh, stop all that. A good person has no need for shame." Even in a new life, Nerda had been unable to escape the habit of scratching the back of her skull. "Not shame, really. Just expediency, I guess. Well, I'm May Parker, and there's no need for any of that with me. You're a hero in my book." Well, May Parker, we should really call this guy an ambulance. And the police? She looked at the man again and said, Oh, an ambulance. Absolutely. But the police? Surely that's punishment enough. Nurda grinned. May had a heart of kindness. She squeezed May's shoulder. If you say so. After that, they had parted ways, but later that day, Nurda ran into May Parker once again. They were actually next-door neighbors. She had arrived at the door to bring her new neighbors a plate of cookies as a housewarming present. The moment Nurda answered the door, May's face brightened with joy. Then she had met the mother of Nurda. They got on like a house on fire, two lovely women of about the same age. Naturally, the topic of their children, May's nephew, in this case, had come up, and the discussion had shifted to her own birthday. After more than 100 years of birthday celebrations, Nurda was happy to skip the festivities. She had a youthful physically, but her heart was ancient. But when the time came, her mother always made sure to kiss her on the cheek and at least put a candle in a cupcake. Now, May Parker had demanded that Nurda visit her home and meet her nephew after noticing the lack of festivities. As she was led through the threshold, up the stairs, and into a teenage boy's room, Nurda didn't object because she was so adorable. It was disorganized. There were posters on the walls, a desk beneath a window, an unmade bed in the corner, and a 17-year-old lad sitting in a desk chair who appeared astonished and was attempting to project a casual demeanor. Teenage boys frequently attempted to portray a sense of coolness around her since she was a lovely girl. Normally it would have been funny, but Peter was staring at his aunt instead of her. May complained, "Oh, Peter, I wish you'd clean this room," as she hurried around and began collecting the garments that were scattered across the floor. From his seat, Peter saw May, and Nurda observed him. His jaw continued to twitch, and his gaze flickered up at the ceiling and then back to May. She looked up curiously. There were what appeared to be white strands sticking a bundle of red and blue spandex to the ceiling. Webs. She faced Peter again, who was now staring at her with unmasked fear. She was unable to contain her laughing. She knelt down and attempted to control herself. There were plenty of costume vigilantes in New York City, but she never imagined she would just happen to walk into someone's bedroom. "Aunt May, please!" exclaimed Peter. She couldn't tell if he was being completely sincere or just acting like the embarrassed teenager. With a heap of clothes in her arms, May stood up. She walked out of the room after saying, Okay. I'll stop embarrassing you." Peter nearly hurried her out, locking the door behind her and leaning against it as he said, "This is Nurda, by the way. I told you about her. Be nice." Nurda settled into his unused chair, grinning and shifting her eyes from him to the costume hanging on the ceiling. "Sue!" She trailed off, pointing to the bundle of webbing and cloth. That's really not what it looks like." "So you're for sure not Spider-Man? You don't swing around the city in tights and fight crime, none of it?" Nope. Just your average mild-mannered teenage boy. Big-time Spidey fan. But not, spidery in the least." She turned the chair toward the desk and said, "Sure, okay." Numerous bits of technology, including a laptop, were in various stages of disassembly and reassembling. She took up what appeared to be some kind of bracelet and began to play with it. "Please don't." The bracelet's nozzle emitted a strand of webbing that clung to the wall with a thwip. With a smug look, she returned the web shooter on the desk. "So what's up, not Spider-Man?" Peter put his head in his hands and moaned pathetically. "Kill me now." An onlooker may get the feeling that his entire world was collapsing. She laughed and watched as he composed himself. Despite being an inch or two shorter than her, he was strong if you looked past his loose-fitting trousers and somewhat oversized shirt. She could see the vascularity in his forearms and his wiry frame. Like her, he was remarkably mature for a teenager. Incredulously, he gazed up at her and said, "Would you stop? I'm not going to tell anyone." She removed the circular framed, dark mirrored sunglasses. She pointed once more to the costume hanging on the ceiling and said, "From what I've heard, you save people. If you want to keep it a secret, that's fine with me. However, you might consider a better system. Just in case, someone looks up." With a sigh, he regained his composure. He shrugged, and she could see another web shooter on his wrist. "Right, yeah? She surprised me. I was about to go out and," he said, looking around shiftily and lowering his voice, "patrol. Thus the, hasty job." He was staring into her eyes, into her face. "Mutant, right? May, told me. You saved her life this morning. I can't thank you enough. Don't know what I'd do without her. I keep telling her to Uber home." He was talking nonstop, uttering things so fast that he may explode if he didn't stop. She let him run off at the mouth for a second before interrupting him, and Naruto couldn't help but smile because it was so cute. "Look, Peter, I don't need any thanks. Besides, your aunt did enough of that this morning for both of you. And it's not like I was going to let her get mugged. I could help, so I did. All there is to it." She nodded and shifted her position in the chair. He murmured, "Great power, great responsibility," but she could still hear it. His head jumped up in astonishment at her answer. "Yep, that about sums it up." And she laughed once more. "We're super people, Peter." He backed away from the door and collapsed on his bed, saying, "True. What are your powers anyway? It's probably more than trippy eyes, right? Not that those aren't cool. Gotta be super strength, right? May says you slapped 3 teeth out of that mugger's mouth. Little excessive, you asked me, but he was mugging my aunt." As he rambled, she observed him. Even for a scumbag mugger who had lost a few teeth, he had compassion. Similar to his aunt. He was either a genius or hyperactive, judging from the volume of his speech and the disassembled technology. He was a decent young man. She interrupted him once more, saying, "I didn't mean to hurt him badly." She pictured it as a common occurrence when speaking with Peter Parker, particularly when he was anxious. She began to tick off her fingers as she named them, saying, "I try not to hit normal people, they're fragile. Even if I hold back. So yeah, super strength." She twisted her fingers, and a crackling sound and red electricity arced between them. "Very good senses, durability, stamina. All the mundane stuff. There's also this." At that, his eyes goggled. "And I can speak every language." He was unsure about where to begin, as evidenced by his prolonged silence. But in the end, he did begin. "That's a lot, even for a mutant, especially for a mutant. I read a few of Dr. Xavier's papers. It's pretty rare for a mutant to be born with multiple powers, and usually they're activated by stressors in their environment. I mean, there are a lot of variables. And you said every language. Did you learn them, or just know them? Your accent sounds Scandinavian, so say something to me in, nothing Germanic, Mandarin. Say something in Mandarin." He was looking forward to it. Unquestionably a genius, then. Probably hyperactive as well. The chair moaned with satisfaction as Naruto got up from her chair. "You're a strange kid," she said in the requested language after focusing for a moment on finding the feel for Mandarin in particular. Normally, when she spoke, people heard their native tongue, but all languages had a certain feel, like a timbre or a taste, and she could speak in those languages specifically if she tried. "Now let's go," she concluded in a typical manner. With unnatural skill, he jumped up and out of bed and inquired, "Where are we going?" "You said you were gonna go on dash." She used her fingers to create air quotes. "Patrol. So let's go. Your aunt brought me here for my birthday, and for my birthday I'd like to see Spider-Man in action. Get your pajamas." "Oh." He widened his eyes in shock before settling into a kind grin. "Happy birthday." He landed on his hands and knees on the ceiling after hopping and flipping. She observed his elegant performance. He gave the impression that it was as simple as strolling down the street. A twinge of envy swept through her. She missed being able to walk on walls. "You're going dressed like that?" he said, glancing down at her. She looked down at her outfit, which included a white pair of slip-ons with tiny orange toad prints all over them, pants with a rip in the right knee, and a band shirt underneath in orange flannel that was not buttoned. She believed she looked good. Adorable, even. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" He took off his mask and put it on. Featuring huge, white lenses in a black frame that appeared to act as a camera aperture, enlarging and narrowing in line with what she assumed were his own eyes beneath the mask. It was red with a black web patterned across it. "Well, you know, to keep your identity a secret?" In response, she shrugged and put her shades back on. "Ta-da! Identity concealed," he said. "Ha ha, very funny," in a deadpan tone. "Now leave, will ya? I gotta get changed." She walked out of his room and waited against the wall opposite the door, saying, All right, all right." He was dressed in the same pants she had just seen him in and a long-sleeved t-shirt when he came out. A rucksack dangled from his shoulder. He pulled his shirt down to reveal red spandex with a web pattern in response to her raised eyebrows. Downstairs, he led the way. Framed photos of the Parker family over the years were strewn all over the wall. She glanced at a recent one. A little 2019 was inscribed in the corner, barely visible. A year earlier, it was Peter, who was a few inches shorter, considerably scrawnier, and wore heavy glasses. He was joined by a middle-aged man who was grinning at the camera and resting a hand on his shoulder. Her gaze shifted from the thin and youthful Peter to the larger, more muscular, and cat-like figure coming down the steps. He had obviously acquired these abilities during the past year or two. That bit of knowledge intrigued her, so she put it away. He called out to his aunt, who was having tea with Nerda's mother in the dining room, as they arrived at the door. "May, we're going out. Be back later." She answered, "School starts tomorrow, Peter, so don't stay out too late." According to her mother, "The same goes for you, Nerdu." They entered Manhattan via the subway. Despite her constant reminders that no one would know her anyplace, Peter reasoned that there was less likelihood that anybody would remember her there. She had only been in New York for a week with her mother. Nerdu knew no one but the Parkers. However, Peter was cautious about his identification since he was concerned about his aunt's security and didn't want to endanger it. At least she could comprehend that. A hot dog stand was the first stop, which Peter said was necessary. Then, without a mask, they shared a picture of Peter dressed in costume. He had packed the rest of his clothes in the rucksack. The early September day was sunny and mild, making it a quite perfect day. As she chewed into her hot dog, she questioned, "I thought Spider-Man's modus operandi was swinging around the city, looking for crime?" "You know a lot about Spider-Man? Are you my biggest fan?" he joked. "I've seen some videos, read a few articles." "So?" Taking a camera out of his backpack, Peter swallowed the last bite of his own dog and shrugged. Even though Nerda had no experience with cameras, this one looked like it belonged to an expert. "Usually, yeah, I swing around. But I'm pretty low on web fluid. Hoping to get some good shots today, sell them to the Bugle, re-up on supplies, do little home chemistry, bada bing, bada boom, more webs. Nobody ever tells you how expensive this whole vigilante business is. But what are you gonna do?" "Exactly, what are we gonna do? I'm all for loitering on rooftops, but it's not much of a patrol." Peter lifted his mask and flipped it over, revealing its inner mechanism. An earphone was hooked to the lenses by a small wire, and the lenses were connected to some sort of circuitry that she couldn't understand. "This," he said, gesturing at the electronics, "connects to my phone," he said, taking the phone out of a zippered pocket that was otherwise very obscure. And my phone runs an app of my own design that taps into the police's radio frequencies. The entire setup impressed Naruto, who whistled softly. And here I am thinking you're just an idealistic kid. You're like a genius, huh? Pulling the mask over his head, he shrugged. First of all, we're the same age, kid. And B, if you weren't just like me, you wouldn't have saved May this morning. She threw the remaining portion of her hot dog bun to 3 pigeons that were lingering and said, Fair enough. They immediately ripped it to pieces. So, any activity on the radio? He only said, Robbery down the street, before leaping from the building. Well, alright then, Naruto said to nobody. Peter had left his camera and rucksack behind in an attempt to make a stylish getaway, so she grabbed both and followed him, leaping to the next building and tracking his movements from above. That was how the afternoon went. Naruto watched and took pictures as Spider-Man stopped a few muggings, possibly the odd bodega hold-up. Peter seems to have mastered the art of fighting average goons. He was aware of the precise amount of force required to subdue them without causing bleeding. She couldn't manage to punch a regular person without at least breaking a bone, but she wasn't sure if he was more skilled or weaker than she was. Knowing where the danger was at all times, he avoided it with more grace than a ballerina, avoiding civilian casualties. This was something he excelled at. She was impressed. And so it continued into the night after sunset. They were finishing up and preparing to pack it in for the night when something more interesting occurred, even though it appeared to be a rather low-stakes afternoon. They were in East Harlem on a rooftop. The city was bathed in orange twilight as the sun descended, resting on the horizon. Peter was receiving his belongings from Naruto. As he took his possessions, he remarked, I wonder if this is what it's like to have a butler. Do I have to pay you if this becomes a regular thing? He staggered back a few feet as she shoved his shoulder and said, I'll throw you off this roof. I swear I'll do it. Don't threaten me with a good TI. Peter pressed his fingers to his ear over the mask as the conversation abruptly ceased. Naruto furrowed his forehead in desperation. He said, Eddie Brock just broke out of Rikers, with an air of seriousness that Naruto felt was excessive. Naruto deadpanned. I don't know who or what that is. Peter flipped up his phone to show her the screen after tapping away at it. The image of A was remarkably clear. Really, she wouldn't call it a man. Although it was difficult to tell from the picture, she thought it was big, coated in something that resembled a mixture of flesh and ooze, and vibrating with muscle. It appeared to be shouting at the person who took the picture, as a big white spider extended across its chest, and its maw was wide open. It had a long, thick tongue that dripped green saliva, and long, jagged teeth. He placed his phone away, as if listening to the radio in his ear for further details. This is Eddie Brock. Venom. And Rikers is a prison. They say he jumped into the river minutes ago, heading west. How'd he get the symbiote back? Not good, not good. Naruto exclaimed. So? Which direction are we going? And was taken aback by the enthusiasm in her own voice. She felt compelled to locate this object. She wanted to find her warrior spirit, but she wasn't sure whether it was just her waking up at the thought of a good fight. Was forced to. Venom's really dangerous. He sounded nearly afraid, but he was unsure. He was whispering to himself. I don't have any sonics either. I barely beat him last time. Naruto refused to accept it. She clenched her hands into fists and punched them together, causing a surge of lightning that briefly arced between her fists' knuckles before she pulled them apart. Oh, don't blush now. Besides, you've got me with you. Yeah. Okay. Electricity's good. His voice had grown more assured. He hurried to the building's edge, fastening his suitcase to the roof along the way. It's a symbiote, kind of like a living suit. That's where he gets his power. Get that away from him and Eddie's just a man. It's strong and versatile, but it's got 2 weaknesses. Sonics, No luck on that, and heat. Electricity's pretty hot, so you bring the heat, and bring it hard. We'll run east across the rooftops. I wanna save the webbing. He's not exactly subtle, so we'll run into him sooner or later. Let's just hope he doesn't decide to lay low in the sewers. And they took off. Venom was sprinting across Thomas Jefferson Park soccer field when they discovered him. He was large, and Naruto was correct. At least 7 feet, if not taller. The sight of Spider-Man caused its mouth to open into a menacing smile. Oh, Peter. You were too quick to find us. We miss you too, but we wanted our reunion to be special, he replied. Despite his loud voice, Naruto thought he was foolish. Instead of coming across as menacing, the way he spoke Peter's name, and his voice brimming with fictitious desire gave the impression that he was looking directly at her. The tongue of Venom slithered out of his mouth and licked his own head and eye, or the white piece of skin that appeared to be its eye. This your girlfriend, Peter? You won't mind if we play with her, will you? Even if he was now merely a creep, it made no difference. She was pulled to him, compelled. Before starting her new life and leaving her job as headmaster, she had not experienced such a calling for violence. This battle was necessary for something inside of her. She strolled past Peter with a smile on her face. She would not deny this calling, whatever it was. It nearly hissed his name. Oh, she wants to play with us, Peter. Don't worry. We'll take good care of, he said, interrupted by a flash of red lightning and a crack of thunder. He let out a shrill, horrifying scream before being flung back a few steps and landing on his back. As the hid patch on its chest steamed, Naruto could see the symbiote's black flesh writhing and wriggling. She refused to give a respite. The fight awaited her, and violence was calling. Lightning arcing from her fists, she ran across the space. Venom, who seems to sense the danger, got up fast but was only punished for his trouble with an electrically charged punch to the face. Where the energy that writhed over her fist had imparted its heat, the symbiote bubbled and steamed. The blow was accompanied by a thunderclap. Venom attempted to retreat, but Naruto kept up with him. The symbiote bubbled in his knee as she kicked it with a charged foot. The object started dissolving after 2 punches to the chest. Above, storm clouds formed, booming with threat and blazing red with her own kind of lightning. Every rumble in the sky corresponded with a blow she delivered to symbiote. She provided the shock and awe, and Peter gazed in wonder. They moved across the grass, leaving behind inactive black puddles where the symbiote sloughed off Eddie Brock. A fierce, completely unanticipated attack caused Venom to retreat. He made a fruitless attempt to block, but his defense would have crumbled under her assault even if she hadn't been as fast as the lightning she swung around so effortlessly. In a few seconds, the symbiote had returned inside Eddie Brock's body, leaving him completely nude and alone. Tall and muscular, he was merely a man without his suit, as Peter had described. The call vanished in an instant. This was a man reduced to pleading, not a worthy opponent. Eddie bowed his head in front of her and said, "Please, you're killing it. Please. Just stop. You win. Just don't kill it. Please." With a sigh, Naruto put her hands down by her sides. The storm clouds were gone as fast as they had appeared. She didn't want to be involved in this. She had completely lost whatever furious fury had gripped her. Peter was still standing in his original posture, stunned by what had just transpired, when she turned to face him. He jolted out of it, and came running over. I was expecting way more trouble than that if I'm being honest, he stated right away. He started to webbing Eddie up, saying, "Maybe I should carry your things from now on. Geez." Naruto noticed movement at the edge of her field of vision. One of the inert pools of apparently deceased symbiote substance caught her attention. She approached it and took a close look at it. It didn't seem to reflect light and was pitch black. Before the puddle came to life and began to roil with an independent thought, she felt the want to poke it, and was just an inch or so away from doing so. The symbiote flinched as her hand ignited with lightning once more. It gathered into a tiny, black ball around the size of a tennis ball, and something on its surface caused Naruto to gasp. At the equator of the ball, 9 red magatama were in perfect alignment. She refused to give up hope. Wouldn't risk it. But she had to reach for it. The same sensation that had urged her to beat Venom mercilessly now yearned for her to grab this item and reach out. She also did. It slithered up her sleeve and out of sight as her palm closed on it. Somewhere in her center there was a fullness now. It felt better than anything she had experienced in years, and a space inside of her that had been empty for 17 years and 9 months was now full. When she heard the voice, she smiled. "Hey, partner." Her mother was still drinking tea and watching the nightly news when Naruto arrived home. Naruto approached and took a seat by her on the couch. She turned a suspicious glance at her daughter and inquired, "What did you two do?" The expression on her face made Naruto giggle. Her mother's expression remained unwavering. "We went into the city, had a hot dog. Normal stuff. You know, if anything, it's not me you should be worrying about." With a decidedly unladylike snort, Aiko set her tea down on the coffee table. She stretched out and drew Naruto's head onto her lap, saying, "No, I suppose you're right. But a mother can't help but worry. Come here." "Mama's girl," the voice of Nine Devil growled in her head. Naruto was simply able to grin and enjoy it. She reflected, "Yeah, I guess I am," as her mother's long braid was undone by her tattooed fingertips. Naruto felt thrills down her spine as the fingers ran through her hair. Naruto ran her own fingers over her mother's left knee and over the koi tattoo that protruded from beneath her skirt. For a few minutes, they watched the news in quiet while seated in that position. When her mother talked, Naruto was partly sleeping. "Is that you, Naruto?" "Was it?" she asked as she snapped out of her slumber and took in the screen's visuals. Hazy footage of a lady brutally assaulting a beast much bigger than herself while hurling red lightning in a park. Naruto turned and smiled against her mother's legs, saying, "Could be anyone." In response, she gave Naruto's hair a quick twist. She said forcefully, "Naruto," and Naruto rolled over to meet her gaze. Aiko's brow was wrinkled as she worried about her lip. "Yeah, that's me," Naruto conceded on that point. "I couldn't help myself." The call, whatever it had been, was powerful, and it was real enough. Neither was left unsaid. "I'm not the type to sit idly by." "Neither are you." In her younger years in Japan, Aiko Sato had been a bit of a vigilante. As evidenced by the numerous tattoos covering her body, she had been a wild child who frequently stuck her nose in perilous circumstances. Although she had abandoned the habit while attending college, she was ultimately a good person. Since Naruto was unable to read her expression, she observed her mother's face while her mother observed hers. When her mother leaned down to give her a gentle smile and a forehead kiss, the intense stare ended. "Be careful. And keep your grades up. And if you really must do this, wear a mask, please." "Oh? I expected you to read me the riot act at least." She gave Naruto her most severe expression, but Naruto knew that underneath it was humor. "You've always been headstrong. If I forbid you, you'll do it anyway. The cost of raising an unruly child, my mother would say." She knew something of unruly daughters. "If it affects your grades, however, that's the end of it." Naruto took her mother's hand and kissed her palm. "Okay." Aiko pushed Naruto and, with her legs free, got up and started to put away her teapot and teacup. "On that note, go to bed. School tomorrow." Naruto mumbled, Yeah. But even though her voice was put upon, the corners of her mouth perked up. The first thing Nine Demon said as she entered her room was, "Your hair is too long." Naruto examined it in front of the mirror. It was wavy and, if she was being completely honest, too long, reaching beyond her but to the tops of her thighs at its longest. It was hot in the summer, it got in her eyes, and it needed an absurd amount of maintenance. However, her voice was low when she said, "It reminds me of Kushina," out loud. Even though she never had the opportunity to get to know her first parents as well as she did the new ones, she didn't want to forget them. She didn't want to let any of them go, regardless of whether her new father had departed, been killed, or something else entirely. Speaking from a red fox head at the end of a black tendril that slithered out from under her clothes, he said, "Fair enough." This time directly next to her head. "Let me show you something. Get naked," she said. Pervert, but nonetheless followed his instructions. When she was completely nude, she said, "Well?" The black substance that she had learned to identify as uniquely symbiote, somewhere between solid and liquid, started to spread over her skin. To put it mildly, director Nick Fury was fascinated. There were displays playing back a super-powered altercation that had happened the previous evening in Thomas Jefferson Park as he sat in his office in the Triskelion. Each panel displayed a different viewpoint and was primarily composed of low-quality, jerky cell phone footage from various sources. He saw as a woman who had been identified as Nda Thor's daughter mercilessly captured escaped prisoner Eddie Brock. She had been easy to identify. Through her employment, a pretty powerful music label, her mother had secured their EB3 visas. That was somewhat typical, but all mutants had to disclose their status and powers when they applied for any type of permanent resident status. The federal government received these declarations. Some mutants attempted to manipulate the system, believing that no one would notice if they seemed normal on the outside. Many were successful. Neither Thor's daughter nor her mother had tried. He examined their photographs in their U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services files. Those eyes could hardly be concealed. The investigation of superpowered events at S.H.I.E.L.D. was well within their daily purview. They needed to monitor these individuals. She had been identified by a routine comparison of the weather and electrical anomalies that were present during the combat with the Department of Homeland Security database of registered mutants. As his gaze scanned her file, Fury smirked and saw a still photo of her electrically wrapped palm. She had underestimated the extent of her influence. She swore that it was small scale. Like a taser, according to her statement. But now there was video proof that it was far more. Fury occurred to believe that the soft pitch created a better first impression, even though it was a crime that he might use as leverage. He removed her file from the USCIS and put it in a bin marked Initiative A1. Bright and early the following day, Nida saw Peter outside her door. He bounced one fist on top of the other, which she knew as a worried gesture, and continued, "Aunt May said I should walk you to school, so—" To make him wriggle, she briefly narrowed her eyes at him. Teenage lads were prime targets for her entertainment value, which she obtained whenever possible. Naruto had enjoyed making fun of numerous genin teams over the years, and it was like being a master in front of anxious genin. He sighed in relief as she released him from the hook, saying, "Okay." 9 demons added, "He likes you," using whatever mental bond they had with their hosts. She passed Peter as she left the house and made her way to her new school. They relaxed into a more reasonable pace as he rushed to catch up. "Cool shoes," Peter replied, looking around for something to talk about. As a symbiote, 9 demons had changed into clothing for her to wear, dying to demonstrate his powers. When it came to something so unimportant, Nudu was reluctant to give him instructions because he preferred a darker style. With the exception of being black and adorned with tiny orange fox faces, her shoes were identical to those from the previous day. "Yep." She instantly shifted the subject to something less commonplace. "Say, what's the story with that symbiote from yesterday? It seemed like you three had some history." After raising his eyebrows, Peter jerked his head in an attempt to identify any uninformed listeners. There wasn't anyone of interest around, save for a few children who were dispersed and moving in the same way. When he was distracted, she used the moment to have Nine Demon pull out a pair of shades from her palm and put them on her face. No one's listening. And stop being so suspicious. A good spy makes a sweep look casual. She showed. She lowered her voice slightly and stage whispered. The symbiote? Don't give yourself whiplash, just look around like you're taking in the scenery. So? She asked. Yeah? I guess it starts with the Fantastic Four. No, Eddie came first, Okay, so when I first took up the webs, everyone thought it was great. I mean, not the police, or the mayor, or the criminals, but everyone else loved it, I guess. Except Jonah Jameson, that's the editor-in-chief at the Bugle. They run hit pieces on Spider-Man, and I guess Jameson considers it a slow day if he doesn't have something negative to say about me. That's why they buy so many pics. Yeah, anyway. Eddie was a reporter for the Bugle. Long story short, he tried to unmask me. Ended up unmasking a copycat, just some guy from Brooklyn, thought it might be fun to do a little vigilante work. Was a pretty skilled martial artist, too. Anyway, it turns out that criminals aren't very big fans of my work, and I was doing a lot to disrupt the Kingpin's operations at the time. He's a big-time organized crime. This is the short version. Yeah, okay. Well, the Kingpin's guys came to this copycat's place and murdered him. Once that came out, Jameson left Brock out in the cold. His career was over in an instant. I guess he blamed me for that. He paused before continuing. Right. So, like 6 months ago, I went into space with the Fantastic Four. It was awesome. I mean, Reed Richards is such a genius. Man, I could have listened to him talk about astrophysics for hours. Neil deGrasse Tyson, eat your heart out. He wiped his mouth when he noticed Nerda's brow. I discovered the symbiote on that asteroid, but it turned out to be a huge hoax. So, sure, we went into space. Something about Dr. Doom trying to extract some alien stuff on an asteroid to construct a new weapon. It was okay at first. It just transformed into a stylish new outfit, strengthened me, and produced natural webbing. After that, I was constantly tired. I was becoming more violent and experiencing mood swings. It was the suit, Dr. Richards stated. It turned out that it was causing my body to go on wild rides at night, changing my body chemistry, and increasing my likelihood of fighting. It was enhancing my feelings and making me a better host in the process. I therefore disposed of it. Eddie must have been shortly discovered. It was a match made in heaven because they both detested me. Or hell, I suppose. Did it ever speak to you then? No, we never spoke. However, I must have spoken with Eddie, revealed my secret identity, and everything. Hasn't Brock visited your residence before? Thank goodness not. And as far as I know, he has never told anyone who I am. I believe they want me to themselves. It's so strange and eerie, he said with a phony smile. Putting an arm around Peter's shoulders, Nerda said, Well, lucky I'm here to protect your chastity. She answered questions about Iceland, how she was adjusting to life in America, and other things, but her day really started after school. School was boring in any life. Nerda kept up perfect grades for her mother. It turned out that parents really cared about that sort of thing, but she wasn't interested in it beyond that. Some kids had been very interested in the new student, but teenagers had short attention spans. The air of mystery her sunglasses gave her was explained away as a medical necessity, and soon she was just a typical new girl. Peter was geared up and ready to go, but she had one item she needed to discuss with him first, and she always felt it was best to just take the Band-Aid off. She was on a rooftop in Jackson Heights with Peter, and she thought they spent a lot of time on rooftops. Peter turned to see that she was wearing the suit that Nine Demon had given her. It was mostly black, the mask reached her hairline, and her hair framed her face, with the extra hair pulled into a long braid that ran to the small of her back, as was her usual style. The eyes were two red patches that resembled Spider-Man's own lenses, and the suit's fingers were red and pointed at the tips, giving the appearance of fingerless gloves. 9 red magatama traced her collarbone, trailed over her shoulders, and finished the circle just below the back of her neck. The suit's red detailing resembled Naruto's first 9 tails core energy mode. Apparently so taken aback by the tail end of the change, Peter backflipped across the rooftop and landed in a crouch on the ledge, firing a wad of webbing at her. The entire thing was instantly encased when Naruto caught the wad in her left hand, charged the hand with electricity, and the webbing melted away as the mask pulled back from her face and she turned to face Peter with an expression of pure annoyance on her face. "Isn't he an excitable monkey? Would you not? Would you please?" She flicked off the last remnants of the melted webbing by whirling her palm back and forth. "That's what you're wearing. What did I tell you? You are aware of what it attempted to do to Eddie and me. This is a separate symbiote. Take the drama down like 10 notches there, Pete," she said nonchalantly as she walked slowly toward him, her hands by her sides in the most unthreatening position she could. "I have faith in him."